Hello, everybody, and welcome to this latest in the ValuesJam guest session series. Sophie, welcome. And to kick off, please introduce yourself and tell everybody about the great work that you do.
All right. Well, hello. My name is Sofie Voss. I'm a PhD researcher at the University of Surrey, where I'm part of a research group that is trying to get people to act more sustainable, but without noticing. We do it mainly applied to the tourism industry, but we do a lot of behavioral psychology. And if you want to get in contact with me, I am on LinkedIn, where I do try to post about the work that we do quite often. So that's a place to follow me.
Great. Well, I've got to ask you two questions as a result of that before we get into our values jam, actually. So you mentioned people being more sustainable but not realizing it. Can you give us a bit more around that?
Of course. And it's always a controversial topic, you know? Like if you ask my granddad, I'm definitely doing a PhD in manipulation, but it depends on who you ask, right? No, so the perspective that I'm taking is more of a nudging perspective. So we go in, and my philosophy is a little bit that everything in your environment, whether that be your friends, family, your work environment, the lighting in your office, everything is nudging you in a certain direction. So it's giving you like small, subtle cues to change your behavior in one way or the other. The only thing I'm doing is I'm taking control of which direction we're doing that in to help benefit yourself and for the planet.
Right. Okay. Thank you for that. That helps me to understand it a bit more. Anyway, the other thing I wanted to mention, actually, this is going to be a little bit of a test of time and location. So, do the labels Senate Building and Way House mean anything to you?
Yes, I think they're both things in Guildford, right? They're both buildings in Guildford.
Okay, so that was the test of time because when I went to university at Surrey,
Yeah.
and my accommodation in the first year was in Way House
Okay.
on the first floor, and I remember somebody coming over from the Senate building, which isn't too far away, right? It's reasonably close, to tell me to turn down my Jimi Hendrix music.
I love that.
So, so here's the Values Jam card deck, and I'm going to tip out the cards and give them a bit of a shuffle. And then what I'd like you to do, please, is tell me how many piles of cards you'd like me to put in front of me.
I like it to put two piles.
Two piles. Okay, they're going to be different sizes. And so, would you like the pile on the left or the pile on the right?
I would like the pile on the left.
Okay. So here we've probably got about, it's slightly shorter, so it's probably about 28 cards. So a number between 1 and 28.
All right, I'll go 22.
22. So let me count from the back then. Two, so that'll be six, four, 22. Okay. So the card you've chosen, Sophie, is efficiency.
Interesting.
Now, interesting is an interesting word. I mean, how do you really feel about your choice?
I think it's a good word. It's actually a word I've been preaching for the last couple of weeks. So it's
Is
very
it?
interesting that that one comes out. Yeah.
How have you been preaching it?
Okay, so as a PhD student, you have this weird work-life balance, right? Because you're not a staff member, you're not working, but you're also not a student anymore. So you kind of have to treat it like a job, so like a 9 to 5. But it is very difficult to combine these two because you'll still have, for instance, people that are funded. We have 3 years to finish our PhD, and if you don't do it within your funding period, that's up to you. So in a certain way, you need to have a certain level of productivity to be able to get everything done, right? And the thing is that I did my master's and my bachelor's at Copenhagen Business School, where our teaching methods were very, compared to many other universities I've seen, very liberal in some ways. So very much like professors didn't know your name. They didn't know whether you were coming to class. Like there was no checking whether who was in class and who not. So you're very like able to go to the things that you felt were productive for you and the things that you felt, oh, I might do this better on my own. You just did it at home. And I've tried to tackle the PhD very much in the same way. So going to the things that I think are productive for my PhD, doing deep work when I think it's productive for my PhD. But then also I think a very important part of this is also taking a break when I think I need it. And I'm really, I don't want to like brag, but I feel like I'm really good at taking breaks, which sounds weird, but I definitely think that that's like a huge part of being efficient and being productive is being able to take breaks, right? So the example that I have from the PhD is that we literally have people, again, no work-life balance, that are maybe in the office for 12 to 14 hours a day, which is insane, from my perspective at least. Like maybe that works for them. However, that's where I think we should value efficiency over productivity. Because I do think that by the end of the day, you see that these people, and for instance, myself, were more or less on the same path in the PhD. So a PhD has a certain milestones that you want to get through, and we more or less get there at the same time. However, I maybe spend half of that time in the office every day. I maybe spend 6 to 8 hours in the office, but I still get the same amount of work done because I prioritize being efficient over being productive. Not that productivity is not. So like my preaching is more about getting the viewpoint away from productivity and more over to efficiency. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it certainly does. And the first question for you actually is a fundamental one. So, what does efficiency mean? And what does it look, feel, and sound like?
Okay. Well, for me, efficiency is reaching a goal within, let me think about this one. Reaching a goal within the set time and the set resources that you've allocated to that. So, for instance, yeah, basically the example I just told, right? That you can be productive, but if you're not efficient, then it's just going to take you a lot more resources and time to get to that same goal. Does
Right?
that make sense?
Yeah, it
So I
does.
do, yeah, so I think that efficiency feels more controlled somehow. So you're more in control of your time, you're more in control of your resources, you're more in control of how you're feeling at the end of the day, because you maybe get more time off, you get to take a break, you get to go do some sport, like see friends, whatever. So I definitely think that it's like being efficient for me is very much a feeling of like feeling empowered.
Okay. So before we move on to those more metaphoric answers, I want to ask you about what you said about it's meeting your goal within the set time and resources, right? And that compares with what I had written down when I was thinking about, well, while I'm listening to Sophie, what do I think efficiency is? And I just wrote down best return on effort.
Ooh, that's a way better definition.
Well, I don't know about that. So this is why I'm curious, because if you have a goal with a set time and resources, if you meet that goal and you're saying I'm therefore efficient, are you not assuming that the goal was an efficient one, whereas it might not necessarily be?
Very true. I think it's a lot like it's the idea that if you put a shark in a tank, it's only going to grow to a certain size versus if you have it out in the ocean, it's going to grow to a way bigger size, right? I do think that you will get the things done in the time that you have and within the resources that you have. So it's about defining an efficient goal to start with, right? Like really like your return. It's not an return on investment, but more or less it's a return on the effort, the invested effort that you're putting in, right?
Yeah. Okay. Um, and you're making me, I can see that shark now, and I'm, I'm wondering about the biology of that. Does the shark actually stop growing or not? I don't know.
We'll have to look it up. I feel like it's an example that I've heard more than one person use, where it's basically this like you will grow. It's also like in terms of getting out of your comfort zone and things like that, right? That you will grow to fit your environment. So if you're in an environment that is making you be smaller, you're not going to grow. You're not going to, get out of there. Or the same with a plant. If you don't put it in a pot that's big enough, it's not going to grow into a tree, right? It's
Yeah,
going to
yeah.
stay like a little sprout. So I think yeah, it makes a lot of sense that if you give yourself these productive and efficient goals, um, that also helps you kind of expand your horizons and think of, okay, like how much work, what do I want to get done within this time, within these resources?
You've made me think of a couple of quite different points as well. So the first one is about how, you were saying you get stuff done within the time that you've got. I think that's absolutely true, and I find myself challenging slash testing myself because what I tend to do is stuff that I know I have to get done, I will not do, and I'll do something else because I know that I'm just going to have to get that finished anyway. Whereas
Very true.
I'm concerned that if I do the stuff I have to do, then I might fill up the time and then not be able to do the stuff that is optional and I would like to do. So it's a way of creating pressure actually, and using the fact that it is needed to be done, which is a bit weird.
Hmm.
And then the other thought that I had, it's to your point about size and whether the conditions determine what is actually done and all of that sort of stuff. And this is a story that I was told by somebody who learnt how to cook from their grandmother, and it was to do with sausages. And when the grandmother used to cook the sausages, she always chopped the ends off. And so this person always used to do exactly the same thing. And when she got a bit older and she was cooking for her grandmother, and her grandmother said, "Why are you chopping the ends off the sausages?" And she said, "Because that's how you taught me to make the dish." And she said, "Well, that was only because the pan was too small for them to be any bigger." So
I love that.
it's this thing about, you set the environment and that determines so much. Whereas actually the question is why are you setting the environment in that
Mhm.
way? I don't know whether that's relevant to this conversation or not.
I think it's a really cool like example of how we like most people tend to follow blindly, right? But I also think that you and I in the terms like basically of the example that you said with like procrastination 101, right? Like getting the easy stuff done first because the hard stuff you're gonna have to do it anyway, right? But I think it's very interesting because it depends a lot on who you are as a person and how you react to stress. Because like I'll be the typical one to say, diamonds are made under pressure. But my sister would be the one to say, like, well, bread rises when you let it rest. So it depends a lot on how you react to pressure and whether you want to have the hard thing to do at the end of the day, or you'd rather start the day by doing that.
Yeah. And it goes back also to when you were talking earlier about the people that are spending a lot of time in the office and you don't necessarily spend as much time. I did notice that you weren't saying that you were right. What you said was that might work better for them. And the key point here, therefore, is, I guess, is it something about knowing yourself?
I think it's knowing what works for you. I
Yeah.
also think that's like, especially academically, like everything is, I'm not, yeah, nothing is better than the other, but it comes in a sequence, right? Academia comes a lot in a sequence. You go from a bachelor to a master's to PhD to lecturer to whatever. Um, so I think at a PhD, you're at a level where you've just had to figure out what works for you. And my mom, she always uses me as an example because she says, well, she was studying to become a medical doctor when she was pregnant with me, and she had her rotation years, I guess it's called, when I was already born. So she was like, I knew that I was a doctor from 8 to 4, but then I was a mom from 4 to 8 in the morning. And then I didn't take anything with me home when I had exams. Like I would study in that time and I would be home later, like so she had to be really efficient with her time
Hmm.
at school. But then the next day she would come to school and she was like, some of my colleagues had eaten dinner in the library and basically slept there. So they weren't rested, they weren't ready for a new day of studying, where she had basically had an entire an entire day's break in between. That's how she felt, you know?
Yeah, and it's probably that blend that, um, whereas on the one hand, there's no one way that is right, there's probably quite a lot of learning that can happen between each a person who uses different ways. So it'd be quite interesting actually for you to, just thinking of these colleagues of yours, imagine spending a day in the office with them for 14 hours and seeing how that goes, and then seeing if you can persuade them to come with you on breaks and seeing how they feel about that. It might be pretty uncomfortable both ways, actually, but who knows?
100%. I think it's very interesting because I'm trying. So I'm the representative for the PGR community here, the PhDs. And one of the things that comes with that role is to organize stuff. Whether that is trainings or social things. And I went to a writing retreat with my own scholarship. I think it was last year week or the week before that. And it was just so interesting because we're so focused. I think the entire society is very focused on these, 8 or 9 hours per day, 5-day work week. Where I kid you not, I was at this writing retreat for 3 days, and we had about 7 writing blocks in total over 3 days that each were a 1.5 hour. And I think I got more done in those 3 days than I've gotten done in a month, because you started the writing retreat, you had to write down what your goal for the writing retreat was. And then you just sat there, and every 1.5 hour, we either had a little break where we all did some yoga together, or we went for a walk together. But you actually got like some fresh air, you got to do something, and then back in. But you knew everybody was concentrated for that 1.5 hour, which was super interesting. But I think it's also the cool part is that many times, especially in academia and in studying, you get caught up in like, in the flow, I should keep going. Whereas I think one of the most important things that I've learned in like my professional life is the power of rest. Like
Oh,
you really need to take a step back, recharge, and come back. And that is something that I don't, again, like nothing is better or worse, but I do see that people that do not rest are the ones that end up getting burned out, or the ones that end up very stressed, or yeah, are just not maybe feeling that fulfilled in the role. Whereas if you take some rest, you can actually come to work every day with a smile. We had that, which is a horrible saying, but I think that most of professors here in the department, when I started, were like, "Oh, you're still smiling. It's just your first year. Of course you're still smiling," which is a horrible way of looking at it. But now I'm in my second year, and now I'm like, I'm still smiling because I think I'm really good at deciding now it's my day off. Like people come in on weekends, people come in both Saturday, Sunday, and then start their week again, where I'm like, I would not be able to function like that. I would not be able to be as efficient with my time if I was just here all the time.
wow. And you're making me wonder now about another word. You used productivity earlier, um, in aligned with efficiency. But the word that I've got in my mind is effectiveness,
Hmm.
because it strikes me that sometimes we might be efficient, but we're not necessarily effective. And it was your story about the writing class that made me think about this, because I was thinking, is that efficiency what you described, or is it effectiveness? So what are your thoughts about that?
I think I think they're very similar but very different at the same time, right? Because I think what was really impactful about the writing retreat was the fact that you set a goal. You knew that you had 7 writing blocks to get this done in. So in that way, it was very effective. But it was the efficiency of having that defined goal that kept you going until the end. So I think it was a combination of those. And I think like yeah, efficiency many times gets confused for productivity, I think. And in a lot of ways, I've always worked next to my studies. So in my bachelor and my master's, I worked for this tech company in Copenhagen. And it was very interesting because I got hired to do what, like 20, 25 hours a week of student assistant related stuff. Mainly financial reports, whatever, the boring stuff. So I thought it was very boring. So decided to start optimizing it. And I spent, of course, some weeks using the 25, 30 hours, really optimizing everything. Problem was that at a certain point, I optimized it to the point where I only had like 5 hours of work every week because everything was just automized, right? Which was perfect for the company. However, I was hired by the hour, right? So out of a sudden, I was telling them I don't have more work. They were like, well, then you can just go home. Like, okay, so I'm being punished for
Yeah,
being productive and being efficient,
yeah,
you know? So I think we have to move away from this. And I think that like you agree on like the project-based work life somehow. Like when you set a project, you have a you don't I don't like the word deadline, but you have a goal and you have something to strive towards. So it becomes effective, it becomes efficient, and it has to be productive, you know, instead of all this focus on productivity that we have nowadays, I think.
yeah, totally agree. And so let's allow ourselves now to think about that metaphor part. So when you think of the word efficiency, what sort of images come to mind? What sort of feelings come to mind? And what sort of sounds come to mind?
That's a very interesting question. Can I ask it back at you? What do you think?
So I guess the cliche of clockwork comes to
Mhm.
my mind. So
Mhm.
an old-fashioned clock mechanism,
Mhm.
I think, as being efficient. And I suppose you could extend that to a machine. Um, but there's a flaw with that in that there are many machines that kind of break down and don't work very well. So maybe it's not the best choice of an example. And also, I've got this thing around how with human lives, we tend, I think, over focus on efficiency. So, going for a long walk in the woods might not be very efficient, but it's extremely rewarding and enjoyable. And so, how do you compare the two actually?
Mhm.
Um, and apart from, you kind of mentioned rest, so it might come into the equation there. Um, And then there's also something actually in this space that you mentioned when you were talking about how you value rest and all the rest of it. And it made me think about how I like to partially complete something and then sleep on it because I
Mhm.
find that actually probably your brain is working on it while you're asleep. So it's not really rest in the same sense as you were mentioning it, but very, very often I have a new insight or revelation just by having slept and not
Mhm.
realizing what work you've done on it. So I started with the image and then rambled off there. So let me come back to the image and give it back to you. Any images that come to mind prompted by that?
I think it's an interesting example that you set with the walk, right? And at least also like the part about rest that I've talked about a little bit. Because for me, a walk is still efficient. You know, I think maybe because I see it as a very holistic thing. I think that if you don't want to have an efficient work day, you want to have an efficient life. And I don't mean that in the, you know, get as much work done as you can, but more than what you said, like return on effort, you know, like you want to reap what you sow somehow. So for me, definitely like going for a walk is efficient because it is a rest in the end. And if that's gonna then allow you to be more efficient in your work afterwards, go for it. If instead of, I remember in Denmark, I think it's the same here in the UK, like most lunch breaks are half an hour. Whereas in Spain, they're more towards an hour to even two sometimes. So I remember coming from that in Spain to then this in Denmark and the UK, where it just felt like I haven't sat down to eat and it's already 10 minutes have passed. You know, so I don't have time to actually disconnect or just have a moment to, you know, or go for a walk or get out in nature or whatever, because it's just, it has to be so packed. And I don't think that's efficient. I just think that's trying to boost productivity in a way that just doesn't work, you know? And um I have a really a funny image that comes around like that comes to mind when we talk about efficiency is actually an image that is not efficient at all. And that is, I went to Rwanda in Africa a couple weeks ago, actually. And I remember one of my friends, she works there for no, Save the Children, for Save the Children. And it was just so interesting because she is Danish genetically, culturally. So she's really grown up with this, efficiency minded and productivity. And, like, she's head of innovation. So she's really much about thinking out of the box, but we're still doing it in a structured way and things like that. And she just told me, like, it just doesn't work here. Like, people don't care if they're being efficient or not, but people at the same time really see work as family as well. So they don't mind coming in on a weekend if they didn't finish their job. And I have the same. I went to visit another friend who lived in Morocco for half a year, and it was the same there. She worked at a restaurant, and the literal restaurant went under construction. They were redoing the kitchen. So the restaurant was closed for 2 weeks, I think. And so they gave everybody 2 weeks off. The people would still come to work. And she was like, but we gave you time off. There's literally nothing to do. The kitchen doesn't work. They're like, oh, but I'll just hang around if you guys need help with anything. So there wasn't this obsession that we have in the West, I think, about work-life balance and like don't dedicate too much life to work and too much work to life and whatever, where I felt like there the lines were so blurry, but also in a cool way, like they didn't have the same symptoms that we have, like we are very much work life, but then we're also some of the most stressed societies, most depressed societies, so does it actually work in the end? I don't know.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something really important there, which is the lens or the terms of reference of how you view efficiency. Because that example of you having your very fast lunch and not being able to connect with your colleagues, it might be that something happens in the project where if you had had longer lunch breaks and established a deeper relationship with some of the people at the table, you'd be able to just call them and say, hey, this thing's just happened. Can we get it sorted out? That's a really super efficient way of dealing with it. Whereas
100%.
if you haven't developed those relationships, you're kind of lost and you have to go through formal channels to understand, who's responsible for what and who you can go to, and be a whole lot more inefficient. So I think for me, what's coming through is your point about, and I know it's gross generalization about the West, but in the West there tends to be this very um, Neanderthalic view, actually, of things, so that you can understand and justify them, wi- and not give space to like the bigger picture and the more unknown stuff that is
Mhm.
absolutely there.
I I had a quote that I found that I put in a little post-it and I hung up on my wall. And it was what gets measured gets done. And I had it up for about a day and then I was like, I don't like this. I literally don't like this. Because, like the message makes sense, and I'm definitely a very structured, organized. You should see my calendar, color coded, everything is boom, boom, boom. Down to the point where I'm like, if there's nothing in the calendar on a certain day, I was like, what did I do? Did I get anything done? So it's like an obsession with efficiency to the other side. Um, where now I have another one up, which I like way better, and it's one that I've had for many years. It's you get what you focus on, and definitely how like also coming from like behavioral psychology about yeah, in the end it's the things that you focus on. People call it the law of attraction. You can call it the universe works in mysterious ways, but definitely behavioral psychology in the sense of if you focus on good stuff, you're gonna get good stuff. And if you focus on shit, pardon my French, you're gonna get shit. So it's a yeah, glass half full, glass half empty type of conversation.
Yeah.
Um,
I want
go
to
ahead,
ask you
sorry.
about your calendar as well, because what you described there sounds like whoa. But I have an issue with it and a challenge for you, because don't you need space for things that happen that you weren't expecting? And by having the space, you're able to be more efficient. Whereas if you're all locked in and something happens, maybe you're not able to deal with something as efficiently.
100% agree. I think I'm very much like a planner, but I'm also willing to change the plan. Like
Yeah,
it's not set in stone. I'm not gonna get
yeah,
upset if anything, like if this week didn't end up going as it had to be, or if this day or this year, I'm not gonna be upset about that. So definitely, I just think it's a fact of, setting a trajectory, setting a course.
yeah,
And then, yeah, I think we talked about it not long ago where we were like, shoot for the moon, at least you land up on the star, like among the stars. Very cliche, but it's also very true because if you're not even aiming, where are you going to end up? So allow for changes in your plan, allow for everything yeah, to go with the flow along the way. But as long as you're going in the trajectory you want to be going, right?
yeah. And it's what I'm thinking like I've got this notion that a plan people tend to think of as being pretty rigid and fixed. Whereas I'm more in your camp of thinking of, so if they're, imagine they're blocks of time and topics, right, in a plan. But the way I think of them is that they can move around as much as you like, as you move forward and as the environment around you changes. And you can add new blocks and topics into your plan. You can take some out and you can change the shape of them. And,
Mhm.
so it's this constantly kind of organic plan rather than a plan.
Mhm. I think that's makes so much sense. And again, like not to quote like Simon Sinek, but like his infinite goals uh theory or concept where I'm not saying that by 30 I want to have done my PhD. I'm just saying like I want to do my PhD in the next couple of years. Like let's see what happens. If I finish it before, it's gonna be cool, but I'm not gonna be upset if I finish it at 31 instead of 30. I still accomplished something insane. And I think it's a very, yeah, cool, like the organic plan somehow. Because an example I have is actually my sister. My sister, she was planning for the longest time. Like when she was in high school, she was planning that when she was done with high school, she would do a tour of Europe. So she would take her bike and she would bike from Denmark to Spain. And that was what she wanted to do. So she, yeah, spent, her entire high school kind of looking forward to this and planning and whatnot. COVID hit, so it even took a bit longer for her to get like back into planning it and whatnot. And she literally got all the gear. She got geared up. She packed everything. She started biking. She made it to Germany, and she was like, "Actually, I don't want to do this anymore. Like this is a plan that I made when I was 16, and I'm 20 now. You know?" So out of a sudden, like, and I'm so happy for her that, she realized that instead of just being like, no, I set this goal, I set this plan, like now I have to pull it through. She still has her bike gear. Still goes on a trip around Denmark whenever she feels like it. But she didn't feel like she had to complete a plan just because she said that she would. Where I'm definitely a bit more like that, big sister syndrome. But but it's very interesting how, yeah, how we make these big plans, but then life happens. My partner always says, we can plan 5 years ahead if you want, but I could get hit by a bus tomorrow. Like you never know what's gonna happen, right?
Yeah. I love that story about the bike trip. And the bit that I would add to it is that I think we imagine somebody telling that story to somebody else and the other person saying, well, I think she should have completed it, and I think she would have felt really good about completing it and would have been so glad that she didn't give up when she was in Germany. And I think it amuses me because it's futile. You will never
Mhm.
know. And so for me, the most important thing is just to make a decision that you're comfortable with. And it doesn't, nothing else matters, actually.
100%. Definitely, if somebody had said that, I would be like, but that's how you work, And again, like that was not her goal anymore. She didn't want to do it. So why should she force herself to complete something that is not even on her list anymore? Like I could say the same, like 3 years ago, I would never imagine that I would be doing a PhD. And now I'm here and I'm like, oh, like I'm gonna finish it because I'm really enjoying it. But I've also said the entire way along since I started, I was like, I'm gonna be doing this as long as I enjoy it. The moment I don't like it anymore, my mental health and my physical health goes beyond everything else. Like I'm not sacrificing that for a PhD or for anybody else, you know?
Yeah, and I guess I'm hesitating here because maybe some people won't agree with this, but the rider to what you've just described is that I know of people that spend their lives never finishing anything, so and that's not a good place to be, right? So there's something about um, making sure that you don't give yourself excuses all of the time, which mean that you're just jumping from pillar to post and end up getting absolutely nowhere. But I don't know to what extent that anybody can say that you should or shouldn't do that. It's an unknown.
Mhm. So I'm actually going to challenge that because I think some of the coolest 40-year-olds I know still don't know what they want to do with their lives. Like I don't think that it's set in stone. I don't think you have to finish anything. I think everything is going to be a learning and everything is going to make you you, right? In a certain way. So, when I was finishing high school, I did my high school in Spain. And in Spain, it's very much frowned upon if you want to do a gap year. But my parents are from the north of Europe. So there it's very much like, hell no, you're not going to go to university right away. You should do a gap year, So it's these competing values. But when I was in high school, I was done. And I'm so happy that I took 2 gap years actually between high school and my bachelor's. Where now I think like if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't be here right now because I didn't have the energy to keep going academically, right? And I remember some of my tutors, some of my teachers in high school were like, okay, Sophie, we've heard that you're telling people that you're doing a gap year. You shouldn't be telling people that because like it's very frowned upon somehow. And I remember this other girl in my class who wanted to become a medical doctor. And she needed to grade. So she was always, asking teachers for like, how can I get extra points or how can I do extra? Because I really need the grade to get into med school. By the end of it, she didn't get the grade to get into med school. So I spent the next year out uh, traveling. I learned a new language. I became a ski instructor. I moved to 2 different countries. I had the best time, made new friends all over Europe, all over the world. And she spent the first year after high school. She ended up going into psychology, but halfway through, she dropped out. And she dropped out to study again for her exams to see if she could get into medicine again. And guess what? She didn't. She didn't get into medicine again. So then you're like, is that then was mine, which was objectively wasted time? Was that a waste of time? But what was actually a waste of time? And in my opinion, honestly, none of it was a waste of time. Nowadays, she's a doctor. Um, she did amazingly afterwards. And, she tried it out again, didn't work out, find something else. And she's amazing at what she does now, So I think it's again like, I think it's very easy to compare yourself to others' journeys.
Yeah.
But when you realize everything's just like human made and nothing of this actually makes sense, like the point of life is just living it, then there's no right or wrong. Like if you want to start 4 different degrees and not finish a single one of them, go for it. As long as you are happy with what you're doing, as long as it takes you where you want to go.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area, and I'm going to use a really tiny example actually. So if you think about running, um, and my son was telling me about a book that he's read recently, and I can't remember if it was Ethiopian runners or Kenyan runners. Anyway, elite runners, and they have a particularly unusual relationship with running, according to this book, where if they're out on a training run, and this is long distance runners, right? And they just don't feel right, they stop and don't do it. Whereas in other environments, it would be that's on your training program. You've got to complete it, no matter how bad you
Sure.
feel. Just get it done. And if I bring, and I'm not an elite runner at all, but I do try to run every now and again. And recently, I found myself in this kind of strange space. And it was after Jack had told me about this relationship that they had with their running. Because if I was out on a run and let's say it was to run 5K or for run for half an hour or whatever it is, I would be, oh, I'm not enjoying this. It's too wet underfoot or it's just not much fun. So I'll stop. And then, of course, the other voice is saying, but you're supposed to finish. And then it's, are you stopping because you can, and that's a good thing? Or are you using it as an excuse not to get done what you should really be getting done? And I don't know what the
Yeah.
answer is.
Yeah, I don't think there is an answer for it in the end, right? Like, I think that what I said about my PhD, I think as long as it's fun, as long as it's something that is contributing to your life, adding to your life, rather than subtracting from it, go for it. But I definitely think that, again, like your mental health, your physical health goes above everything else. And honestly, everything in this life will boil down to the people that you have besides you. Like I heard this amazing quote, which was like, you're never gonna see on a tombstone or like on your when you're on a deathbed, you're never gonna be like, I wish I worked more.
Yeah,
So like I think it's about prioritizing. And in the end, I think that prioritizing is definitely something that I have been struggling with for a very long time. Prioritizing people, prioritizing situations and jobs and whatnot. I feel like I'm getting better at it, but it's a journey, and definitely finding the time. That's what we talked about before as well. For instance, if I have a plan for what I want to get done in a week and I have my last writing block today, if a friend or a colleague comes in and they're devastated and they need to talk about something, I will postpone that
yep,
because
yep,
people are always going to be more important to me than anything else. And that's a very social science point of view, maybe. But I do believe that people are at the center of everything that we do and everything that we don't do. Again, like nothing that we do is in isolation. It's always thanks to the people that are besides us, right?
yeah. And you've reminded me of an example recently where somebody was talking about procrastination. And I gave the example of eye test. So I haven't been for an eye test for quite a long time. And in the discussion, it was, well, why is that? And my answer was around efficiency because it's like, well, I don't want to make a special trip to go and do that. I want to try and maybe do it with something else at the same time. So I justify the time and da da da. And as a
Mhm.
result, I haven't got it done. And this person came back and said, actually, that exact thing, the same thing happened to me until somebody told me that it wasn't just about my eyesight, it was about the health of my eyes. And that's why you really go. So they explained that by reframing it in terms of that level of importance, that gave them the motivation to go and get it done. And it absolutely worked for me. I've got an appointment in a week and a bit's time. Um, so it's this thing about, and we've come back to it again. We talk about efficiency in a very small way a lot of the time, whereas actually we could be looking at efficiency in the bigger picture, like with your
Mhm.
distraught friend. That's being efficient for life rather than efficient for a task.
100%. I think it's also something, I loved your example with the eye trip. I got my glasses in December, so I'm definitely on boat with you. Um, but I had the same with I started therapy as everybody does in my generation this year or last year. And I remember telling my friends like, oh, I'll start with like online to see how that goes, and then I'll see if I find somebody like in my hometown or whatever. And they were like, oh, but have you considered have you considered just straight away going for somebody that's in person? I'm like, oh, like I travel a lot, so I'd rather just do it online so I can always have a session whenever needed. And they were like, but have you thought about like the psychological fact of taking the trip to go there? Like it is you dedicating yourself the time. You get in the mindset when you're
Yeah.
on the way there. You didn't rush from a meeting and you're actually taking it while you're still at work and then you go,
Mhm.
so actually like dedicating the time. And I think it's the same with the psychologist or with friends when you're actually making time to go and see friends in real life rather than just FaceTiming or talking on the phone or whatever. It gives you something different, right? And also the fact of like I'm totally the same as you. So I'll definitely be the one to try to cramp as many things in a trip as possible, right? But then I'll do too much of it, right? Because then I think that you can overload a trip. Because then you'll say, okay, I have to go to the eye doctor, but I'll go when I have to go buy groceries because it's right next to it. Oh, but now that I actually have to buy groceries, I could also go to this other store. And out of a sudden, you're going to be in town center for 5 hours getting everything done that you needed to get done. And I have an example that starts next week where I was originally supposed to go for my grandma's birthday to Denmark. This ended up being a 3-week trip where I have two conferences. I have four different countries I'm going to. And it's just out of this world, like, and I'm looking to it and I'm like, okay, mentalizing that this is coming. It's all good stuff, of course, but you're still like, it could just have been a trip to see my grandma. Like you didn't have to be like, oh, but while I'm already out, I could go see this friend who is their birthday, and then oh, I have this conference next to it, so I'm just gonna stay there until I have to go to the conference. Then, yeah, so you can also overdo it.
Yeah, and it's also this thing that we were mentioning earlier about leaving the spaces for something to happen. So it might be that while you're over there, suddenly somebody mentions somebody that you used to be great friends with, and they might be available in a moment, but you've actually got something booked because you've crammed your schedule out, and then you're not able to see them, or you have to change and upset somebody, and all of that stuff.
Exactly.
Um, I think that thought about you visiting your grandma and then trying to get everything jammed in honor of efficiency and how that's made you realize that that might not actually be efficiency is a lovely moment to bring our values jam to a close, actually, with that kind of hanging. And the final question I've got for you is, what are you encouraged to do differently about efficiency as a result of this conversation?
Ooh, that's a good question. I definitely liked your really good definition of efficiency, like a return on effort. And definitely have that a lot with my supervisors. From the beginning of my PhD, they were like, Sophie, we don't care about input, we care about output. So as long as the output is good, you do whatever input feels right for you. If you need to work 7 days a week, you work 7 days a week. If you work three, you work three. We don't care. Um, so definitely having that perspective on, yeah, having the plan, but not set in stone somehow, right? So what you mentioned of like leaving room for serendipity or improvising, right? And yeah, this is something that I talk a lot about with my partner because I'm definitely, a 5-year planner ahead, and then what steps do I need to take backwards? And he's like, what do I like doing today? What then I will do being doing that today. Let's see where it leads me tomorrow. And so definitely, yeah, trying to maybe incorporate more of these, like air gaps, if you want to call them like that, like moments of respite where you can actually, sit down and breathe. My friends in Spain, they're making fun of me because, like I have a busy schedule, which I created myself. My mom's the same, so I'm learning from her. I have supervisors who are the same, so all my, references in life are like doing this. So that's probably why we're here. But one of my goals this year was to at least have one evening a month that was just for me and where I turned off my phone and where I did, art or I read a book or did whatever, but it would just be for me. And that was my way of trying to create space, because otherwise, like we said before, I'll always prioritize people on top of everything because I do think that people are some of the most important things in life. But you also have to remember that you're a person and that sometimes having a date with yourself is kind of important.
And we're in March, so how's that going?
It's going pretty good. Actually, my March session is tonight. So
Okay. And what have you got planned?
So what I've got planned. So after work, I'm gonna go out and I'm gonna do some shopping. It's a friend's birthday coming up, the one that I'm going to visit in my 3 week Europe trip. So I'm gonna go get her a nice birthday gift, and then I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna read a book. I'm gonna play my ukulele a little bit, like I'm gonna make some nice food. Just it's a no phone kind of evening, just doing my own thing. And again, like that's kind of what I have in mind, but I'll improvise as I go, whatever I feel like in the moment.
You know what I love about this is that, and actually that specific word you just mentioned about improvise, how we've just demonstrated that um, having real downtime focused on just you and allowing yourself to improvise can be done in honor of efficiency. There's just something
100%.
great about that. What am I encouraged to do differently is something about efficiency being a mindset rather than an activity, and how we can trust ourselves to make choices and decisions that are efficient without the need to justify them. So, you might find it hard to explain to somebody how taking an evening off is in honor of efficiency. You can't prove that. But if you trust it, then just do it.
Hmm.
So that's what it's
100%.
bringing through for me.
That's
So,
really good.
Sophie,
Love that.
brilliant values jam. Thank you so much for joining today. And thank you for choosing the card that took us through our values jam.
It was very nice. Thank you so much, Alan. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.